There are stories for seasons, and I'm going to talk about one that is so unique and so well told that I think it's perfect to read every autumn. When I think of fall, I think of pumpkins and bonfires and hay rides and leaves changing, apple cider, pumpkin pie, wrapping yourself in a sweater on a brisk evening. Fall is also the time of year where we invite terror into our lives. Halloween and ghost stories and pumpkin spice lattes and we need some reading to bring these two aspects together. And that is why I think The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving is a perfect addition to every fall reading experience. This short story was written over 200 years ago, and even today, it retains its lasting appeal, its ability to enchant readers. What makes the story so appealing? What gives it its endurance? And really, what is the point of this story? Hi, I'm Nathan Harold. Thank you for joining me today. If you haven't read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow before, here's a very brief plot summary. Ichabod Crane, a schoolmaster, tall, lanky, erudite, somewhat lascivious, competes with Brom Bones, his opposite in nearly every way, to win the marriage of Katrina von Tassel. This competition culminates in Ichabod encountering Sleepy Hollow's greatest legend, the Headless Horseman. Let me start by setting the scene for Washington Irving in early 19th century America, because I think a little bit of context will really help you appreciate the story more. I'll start by making the claim that Washington Irving is the first American writer. The story was written in 1820. All right, so the Revolutionary War was not that far in the past. In fact, many people had fought in the war. It was very present in their minds. And many people still retain stronger cultural connections to the heritage of their homelands, rather than this new place called the United States of America. The United States was still forming its identity, and this early identity was more representative of a patchwork of faraway nations rather than a singular United States. Enter Washington Irving, an ambitious young writer who is looking to pen stories for the widest available audience that would read them. Washington Irving published this and other well-known stories like Rip Van Winkle in a collection of stories and essays called The Sketchbook. Now, Washington Irving was looking for a very broad audience. The United States still had less than 10 million people living there. Where could he find a broad, literate, English-reading audience? Europe. Washington Irving actually wrote this while living abroad in England. He spent 17 years of his adulthood living in Europe, and that is where his reputation as a writer grew. He would eventually return home to America with his reputation as a writer firmly established. One born of straddling Europe's firm literary tradition and this new prospective culture in the United States. Writing for this foreign audience creates the first main strength of the story, the atmosphere. The setting of Sleepy Hollow nestles in this liminality between foreign and familiar, and the atmosphere is such a prominent feature of Irving's best writing. Irving is so methodical and patient with his storytelling. This is well before today's modern conventions of the horror genre of jump scares and gore. This story is spooky, it's uneasy, but also really indulges in a lot of fun. If I were making a new genre on the bookshelf, I'd probably clear space and call it cozy horror. He uses familiar, gentle language to describe rustic New York. I'm going to read an example from the opening of the story. There is a little valley, or rather lap of land, among high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. A small brook glides through it with just murmur enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of a quail or tapping of a woodpecker is almost the only sound that ever breaks in upon the uniform tranquility. But as the story zeroes in on this particular setting, things become a bit more dreamlike. I really love how he sets this up over the first few pages because you're getting a sense of early New York. The city isn't all that different from today's New York City in terms of its characteristics. And then just a stone's throw away, there's Sleepy Hollow in the Hudson Valley. And it is this place that is dreamlike and foreign, more representative of a Dutch village centuries before. Here's an excerpt where he's zooming in and creating the subtle tension between familiar and unfamiliar. I mention this peaceful spot with all possible laud, for it is in such little retired Dutch valleys found here and there embosomed in the great state of New York that population, manners, and customs remain fixed, while the great torrent of migration and improvement, which is making such incessant changes in other parts of this restless country, sweeps by them, unobserved. They are like those little nooks of still water which border a rapid stream, where we may see the straw and bubble riding quietly at anchor, or slowly revolving in their mimic harbor, undisturbed by the rush of the passing current. And then he continues to zoom in, and we see that the denizens of Sleepy Hollow live right alongside ghost stories, some of which have existed for generations. There's ghost stories of killed soldiers, there's stories about the woman in white, but looming above all of them, the greatest ghost story of all in Sleepy Hollow is about the Headless Horseman, a Hessian who has a reputation for appearing on dark nights and chasing people on his demonic steed. A Hessian was a German soldier who fought for the British during the Revolutionary War. It's not technically correct to call him a mercenary, because they were official troops, they were not individuals. But the important thing to know here is Hessians had a reputation for being fierce fighters, not someone you'd want to come across on the battlefield, and certainly not someone you'd want to come across on a dark, lonely night. So this setting presents this version of America that is quite literally still haunted by its European past. So who populates this strange spot? Over the course of 30 to 40 pages, we are introduced to some of the most memorable characters in American literature. The characters are so memorable because they are recognizable. And they are the second key ingredient to this story's longevity. Ichabod Crane is our protagonist. He's not native to the village, he's from Connecticut. Tall, lanky, kind of goofy looking, like a scarecrow. And we learn Ichabod may not be the most pure-hearted person around either. He's a schoolmaster, combination of teacher plus principal administrator. He doesn't hesitate to bring out his rod when dealing with unruly students. He likes lazing by the river and reading his copy of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft. Just a side note here, Cotton Mather was a real person. He was a minister from Boston, and he was involved in the Salem witch trials in the 1690s. The key thing here is Mather was a true believer in witchcraft. Ichabod also carries this full belief in the ghost stories that capture his imagination. What else do we know about our main character? Ichabod also spends a lot of time going from house to house visiting the farmers' wives. You see, schoolmasters, they were very well educated, and they were somebody any farmer would want to invite into their home. He retold stories from the books he read, but more than that, he was also a town gossip and sort of gazette. Because he was visiting every person's home, he'd be able to share the news with the neighbors. And in Ichabod's case, we learn that his primary motive for these house visits is because they would offer him the best food they had available. Ichabod, he's got fast metabolism because throughout the story, his appetite is insatiable. It is his primary motivator. Food, not love, not reading, not teaching children. Food is his primary passion. Who do you think has the most food in Sleepy Hollow? Well, there's a Dutch farmer, Van Tassel, who has bountiful crops and pigs ready to be roasted and flapjacks ready to be mixed, pancakes. Van Tassel has a daughter who just happens to be the most eligible bachelorette in town, Katrina. Katrina, 18 years old, plump as a partridge, and I really love this detail. Irving describes her dress. She wears dresses from the old country, dresses brought over by her great-great-grandmother. And then she will also wear some of the modern fashions. So again, familiar, foreign. This really brings forward how odd people are inhabiting this odd place. Katrina has this demure demeanor, and while her heart doesn't seem set in any one direction, she doesn't seem to dissuade suitors either. But the farm she will one day inherit, and all the food that comes with it, really gets Ichabod going. And he tries. He really tries to win her hand in marriage. But of course he's not alone. There's competition for Sleepy Hollow's crown jewel, and that is Brom Bones. Brom Bones. What kind of character do you conjure when you hear the name Brom Bones? You're probably right. Brom is a local. He's physically strong. He's brash. If there's a brawl in town, he's probably at the center of it. He's a leader of a gang of local ruffians. He's everything that Ichabod is not. And he gives Ichabod a run for his money in his dogged pursuit of Katrina. Brom also has a reputation for being an excellent horse rider. You'll notice all three of these main characters are comical. None of them are wholly sympathetic or heroic. In fact, they're so small in their ambitions. But in this story, that works. That's what makes them so timeless. We've all met versions of these people. These three characters are driving the story until the headless horseman shows up. And once he shows up, I promise you are going to keep flipping pages to the end. It is first-rate tension. Now let me address the point of the story. And then there's an epilogue, and I'm not giving anything away here, but it will confront you with the question of what is the point of this fascinating tale? 200 years later, we're more reinforced than ever of trying to assign grand themes or unquestionable depth to the stories we read and consider great classic literature. Is having the right ingredients, character, setting, plot to create an entertaining story enough? If you want to zoom out with me, let's go back to Washington Irving and his place in American literature. He's a bridge writer. He's American. He's European. He's in this liminal space. He tells fascinating stories written for mass consumption. Check out Rip Van Winkle after this. Yet he's not analyzed for his depth like Herman Melville a generation later. But this new writer in this young country showed the world that there was a new culture worth reading. And that point holds up even today as we enjoy his stories on autumnal evenings, making it one of my favorite parts of the fall reading experience. If you've read this story before, let me know what you think of it. Let me know what stories you associate with seasons. And thank you for joining me today. Keep reading, keep exploring, keep growing.